Okay. Welcome to Into the Channel, podcast primarily about women's football. Before we hit the pitch, if you enjoy the show or love women's football as much as your boys do, come rock with us already. Subscribe, follow YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to watch or listen. Comments, ratings, reviews, always appreciated. At ITC_pod on X, at Into the Channel pod on Threads. I am your host, Dino Cespedes, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Grant Angle. What is up, man?
Oh, buddy, I am feeling great because of the sheer amount of interesting things that we've got to see in this past week. But I do also realize it's mea culpa time for your boy.
I think you might mean boys, plural. Let me just clear out here. I'm going to let you do your thing.
All right, let me get this out of the way. Just straight up. To our pals and Mexico, lo siento. Let's get back to last week's episode. After USA beat Argentina 4-0, when you, Dino, a good man with good intentions, asked me, what was I thinking about USWNT's matchup against La Tri? I started my mini rant by saying, quote, I think Mexico's in trouble, end quote. But that wasn't enough. Not only did I go on to not really even preview the match upon second listen, I proceeded to go out of my way to point out that Mexico is ranked 5 places above Jamaica in the FIFA World Rankings, and then cite that Jamaica made the round of 16 in the 2023 World Cup, knowing that Mexico didn't qualify for last year's tournament, which even felt unnecessary at the time, but I thought it worked comedically, and it turns out it did work comedically, but for reasons I absolutely did not expect. So let me say, what a pendejo. What a fucking estupido I am.
So good.
If I can get away with this, let me just say, again, Mexico, lo siento, no estaba familiarizado con tu juego. So please, let me know what you saw in the match now that that's out of the way.
Excellent work by you. Well, first off, I'm going to co-sign that apology if that's cool. If there's any room on the apology bandwagon, I'd love to hop on board. Because also on last week's pod, I wondered aloud if the U.S. would, and I quote, hang another half dozen on Mexico to make sure we grab that 1 seed.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Ooh, buddy, what a difference a week makes. Where do we even get started with this one? Tons of thoughts, but let's start here. Mexico just fucking controlled the game. No two ways about it. U.S. reverted back to let's go forward at all costs, even to the point where Becky Sauerbrunn, the vet, one of the OGs, 218 caps to her name coming into this one. Instead of clearing a ball kicked her way, Becky decides to try and clear it back over her head because 75 yards away from goal, it's very important we restarted our attack immediately. Elizabeth Ovalle presses her, wins the ball, puts Mexico up 1-0. But before we dive into that, though, why did it feel like the entire team, the entire game plan, the entire philosophy of this match was reminiscent of like late 2000s U.S. women's national team football? Is this like a tactical issue, a strategic issue, personnel issue? What exactly do you think went wrong here?
There are probably elements of all three, maybe some tactical stuff, some strategic stuff, some personnel stuff. I think it was discussed a lot on WOSO social media, if you will. But I don't think we can really underestimate or understate the absence of Naomi Girma on the back line. Her ability to play the angles, to steal or deflect passes, or just make life more difficult for opposing forwards, it felt like that was sorely missed. But even more than that, I think the lack of ability to play passes from the back line and play forward, I think that was pretty obviously missing. To kind of put some numbers to Girma's impact there, according to our pals over at FB Ref, they have these scouting report stat that Dino and I have cited before. The scouting report stats, they compare players of the same position in the top leagues across the last 365 days. Naomi Girma is in the 89th percentile of center backs with a pass completion percentage of 87.6%. Beyond that, she's in the 81st percentile in expected assists and in the 80th percentile of shot creating actions. So she is a center half that is giving you great defense, but also getting your attack started. If we're talking about strategy, if you're not going to have Girma in there, you might want to consider at least having Tierna Davidson or Jenna Neiswanger on the pitch. Neiswanger came in the 61st minute, but her passing probably would have been a little more useful throughout the match.
Yeah.
And thinking of that passing, I'm curious kind of where you landed on that.
Well, it wasn't good, buddy. not not having Germa, who we've said before might be the U.S.'s best player, that definitely hurt. With regards to the passing point, though, it was fucking abysmal. Like, Horan was off, Crystal Dunn, Lavelle, Lynn Williams, not much better. Sauerbrunn, who we mentioned, had a giveaway in the middle of the park early on like the slowest of slow rollers. That could have also turned into a legit chance for Mexico. But I did want to have a quick Sophia Smith conversation. We kind of touched on it a little bit last week. I had to go back and rewatch it. I rewatched the first half just for the purposes of jotting down these stats because, 2024, stats like this still pretty hard to find. Sophia Smith, 49 first half minutes played. I counted roughly 20 or so touches, 1 shot, 0 shots on target, and this one stung. 11 passes attempted, only 5 of those were completed. A paltry 44% completion percentage, roughly half of what Naomi Girma does on the reg. Felt like too many times in this one, Smith had her mind absolutely made up, like well before she was able to like survey the field. And on more than one occasion, she just like literally ran directly at defenders to kind of like stifle her own opportunity. I think the U.S. really missed Mia Official, but to be honest, like the service and the passing in general was so poor. Not sure she would have made much of a difference either way. It really does feel, and I kind of hate to say this, but it feels like might be like a football IQ issue. Something Emma Hayes is, I think, going to have to really try to tackle really, really quickly before this summer's Olympics. The spacing just looked really off, which makes passing a little bit harder.
Great.
It just seems like these other teams just have 2 or 3 options to go to, and we just didn't. I'm not sure if we're playing it too frenetically and people are just darting when they shouldn't be. And, like it's almost like people are running from open situations to more defended situations. So it's more than the personnel issue. It's more than not having Girma out there who has this talent to be able to fix that gap. There just was no place to go with the ball. But enough about the U.S. Let's talk about the real juggernauts of Group A, Mexico. What did you see in this one from Latri?
Real quick, that's a great point about the spacing. There was a clear difference from each side. So if I wasn't too busy on last week's episode comparing fucking FIFA rankings, in a proper preview, I would have mentioned that Mexico employs 28-year-old Houston Dash left wing, left midfielder Maria Sanchez, who many of our pals watching or listening to this likely know. She has the richest contract in the NWSL. She signed a 3-year deal with a 4th-year option worth $1.5 million in December. Get that money, Maria. Here's some interesting stuff about her. Not only was she it felt like she was important in that spacing that you're talking about, like the runs she's making out wide, the passes that she was able to serve into the middle, creating some chances. I found some interesting stuff that this might be old news to other folks, but as we always say, this is a learning podcast. It was interesting to have this stuff kind of refreshed for me. Sanchez was born in Nampa, Idaho in 1995. Her parents were both born in Mexico, but they lived in Idaho and worked in potato fields and potato processing plants for like 4 decades. And that is not an Idaho joke. And for all our international listeners, Idaho is like the famous potato place. But this is legitimately where they work. This is according to a 2022 story from the Idaho State Journal, local newspaper out there. Here's another fun fact about Maria Sanchez. She didn't play for a club team growing up. Idaho, not exactly a hotbed for great youth soccer programs, from what I understand. And even so, club-level football in the United States can be cost prohibitive for a lot of middle-class families. So Sanchez only played high school soccer, and she played the hell out of some high school soccer. Here are her goal totals per year in her high school career. Her freshman year, 26 goals. Her sophomore year, 34 goals. Her junior year, 50 goals. And her senior year, 78 goals. I don't know.
Holy shit.
I don't know what the high school girls soccer schedule is in Idaho. I'm going to guess they don't play much more than 25 games a season, if that. So I'm going to guess that 78 goals is a fucking whole lot of goals.
She was cooking.
Good potato joke. The first goal was set up by a long ball of Carla Nieto. We'll talk more about her in a bit. She was playing in the midfield. It was one of those like over the top balls that like felt like it was like 75% clearance, 25% fuck it, the striker is down there somewhere.
Yeah.
And to your point, Sauerbrunn just kind of like fell totally into the trap and like really was a bit of a howler from Sauerbrunn. Becky Sauerbrunn is one of the greatest players in the history of the program. You know, it happens to everybody. It was a crazy decision by her, though. And 24-year-old Tigres striker Lisbeth Ovalle, as you mentioned, she was down there all right. She took advantage of Sauerbrunn's mistake and just had ice in her veins when Nair comes rushing at her. And I think Nair made the right decision because she was already off her line a little bit. If Nair started backpedaling back, she likely has no shot to stop any good strike from Ovalle. So Nair does the right thing by rushing at her, and Ovalle, just cool as you like, get the ball onto her left foot and then hit the perfect chip. That was just a delightful piece of skill, but I thought the calmness and the presence of mind was really impressive.
Yeah, incredible composure. Filthy little scoop from Ovalle.
Oh, yeah.
Nair was like decisive coming out, and then she all of a sudden got indecisive. Like right as she was like a couple feet away, she's like almost like breaking down like a linebacker, like, all right, you're not going to get past me. And then Ovalle is like, oh, I'll just scoop it over you with the perfect arc and a beautiful finish. Pretty cheeky, but also the right play and the smart play from Ovalle. I'm glad you called out Sanchez, Nieto, and Ovalle as a trio. There was a great sequence from those three, maybe 10 minutes earlier. Haran's on the ball, like 25th minute. Nieto's hounding her. Haran misplays a pass to Crystal Dunn. Poor passing from the U.S. Strikes again, no biggie. Ball's intercepted by Ovalle. She slides the ball ahead to Nieto, like up the right-hand side. Really nice cross over the top to Sanchez, who gets a foot on it, defended by Dahlkemper. She can't put the shot on target. But like kind of from that moment, you could tell that trio of Mexican attackers was in some real rhythm. And that sequence definitely came closer to scoring than anything that the U.S. had done to that point. And that was the first little baby signal that I'm like, this one's going to be tricky. Well, I don't think we're going to hit our half dozen. I also thought Nikki Hernandez holding things down on the left side for Mexico, really good game from her. She had a lot of responsibility having to like settle things down when Mexico regained possession while having to keep up with Trinity Rodman and also playing a lot of smart passes and pretty much mistake-free football. She was really good at shutting down U.S. chances at the very start of the action, like key blocks, key takeaways, great positioning. A lot on her plate in this one, and she was totally up for it.
That's a great point about Hernandez. She had her hands full with Rodman running up and down the field. And going back to Nieto, who we mentioned earlier, I thought she was also able to kind of get back there with Hernandez, help clear some balls out of dangerous areas. But then later in that first half, Nieto hits an absolute laser at the death of the first half from about 19 yards out. She has Nair completely beaten. And USA, frankly, gets a little bit lucky when it blasts off the crossbar. And it felt like they were escaping the first half only down 1-0, which is never a good sign.
Yeah, totally agree.
Lastly, I want to talk about Mayra Pelayo because we have to fucking talk about Mayra Pelayo. From West Palm Beach, Florida, by the way. She played for the University of Florida and was in the U.S. Women's National Team youth program. She came on in the 81st minute and immediately started bossing the game. She hit an incredible shot from what had to be like 35 yards out, forced a great save by Nair, and just a completely ridiculous effort. Just unbelievable. Like it's sneaking in there. Nair had to do everything she could to keep it out. And then Nair was able to recover, get up, and block a shot off the rebound from Jasmine Caceres. And I thought to myself, holy crap, great attempt by Pelayo. It's really hard to hit a strike like that right under the bar, force a save from the keeper. Okay, USA survived that. We might be able to get an equalizer here, steal a point out of this.
Let's go.
Pelayo not interested in that at all. So I think she just kind of, she read it and she was like, okay, 35 yards isn't going to work out. Let me try something a little easier. Let's do like 20-ish yards. That was her next attempt. And she hit the ball about as cleanly as a human being could possibly fucking hit it and drilled it into the corner. No chance for Nair. Mexico up, 2-0, and that was lights out from there.
Yeah, that one hurt. Great call from the color commentator who called it in midair. She was like, oh. That's tough.
It was amazing.
Side note, did you see that play where the ball is like clearly trickling out of bounds for what would have been a throw-in, and Nair's like just running after it frantically for no real reason? Like She's the only one going after it. And I'm just like,
Yes.
at that point, I'm like, it felt like we were mentally short circuiting as a team. I'm just like, what the fuck was that? Like, there's
It was very weird.
like weird, like a FIFA glitch or something. Like the computer does just something like totally random and weird. People are just running backwards for some reason.
Yeah.
Very odd. Outside of that, I was shocked by like how much of a physical advantage the US didn't have in this one. Like these two sides looked pretty even athletically. And to see like a Trinity Rodman, a Crystal Dunn, Sophia Smith, Rose Lavelle not really be able to separate, that was a surprise. I was like, okay, like now our big advantage is just off the table in this match. Not saying permanently, but
right.
I think Mexico was also better technically, better passing, better spacing, more looks at goal for them. You already mentioned a couple of those really close calls. That first one before the half, that was another chills down the spine kind of moment where you're just like, oh man, this is not trending in the right direction. According to our friends at FOTMob, US managed just 6 shots, 3 on target, compared with Mexico's 9 shots, 7 on target. My big concern as we look ahead in this tournament is that this didn't feel like a fluke. It felt like a thorough handling of the US women's national team by Mexico. If these sides meet again next week, which I suppose would have to be in the final based on how the bracket shook out, is like Germa, Davidson, I don't know, Moultrie, maybe more Neiswanger, like you mentioned, maybe more Jaden Shaw. Is that enough to make you think, yeah, we can handle this Mexico side? And then this was just maybe a little blip.
Well, I'm never making the mistake of just kind of dismissing Mexico ever again. I mean, that was silly. It was very clear. Yeah, lesson learned. I can't fool me twice, but
can't get fooled again.
Exactly. Shame on me. I will say, though, of course, immediately after I say I won't get fooled again, I do think, and I think you nailed it with those 4-5 players, really. Germa, Davidson, Moultrie, especially, who looked really good, and Neiswanger. Moultrie looked good earlier in the tournament. I think those 4 are huge. And then Jaden Shaw, they had to be careful with her because she was already on a yellow card. They needed to get to the knockout round for the last yellow card to get wiped off, because if you had 2 yellow cards, you had to sit for a match. So I think they were being protective of her. That's why they brought her on later. So I do think those 5 make a difference. It just depends on your definition of, is that enough for the USA to handle this side? Well, actually, now that I think about the context that you're saying it, I think you're meaning handle is just like keep it competitive and play them, not handle as in like push them around. And I do think a lineup change would absolutely make them look much more competitive and look good to win the match.
Yeah, I think it could, at the very least, even things out.
Sure.
It was just such a thorough win from Mexico.
It really was.
I think U.S. had the edge in possession, something like 57-43, something in that range, but no control of the game. Never had control of the game. Mm-hmm. Like from the very jump, everything was frantic. Everything was as fast as we can. No build up, no link up. It was just, I don't know. Maybe it was just kind of like a confluence of, or maybe maybe they did what we did last week. We're just like, 35th in FIFA rankings. We'll just no biggie. We got this. Something definitely to continue to monitor.
I think so. I like that you use the word of like, could it have been a confluence of things? Because everything Haran hit felt like 20% overcooked. There were just a lot of things like, and you're not going to expect that from Haran a bunch of times in a row. I mean, you really nailed it with Sophia Smith's touches. Like when you're talking about in the first half, 11 passes, 5 completed. If they're going to play her on the wing or, maybe ask her to drop back and be a part of the buildup, you just have to make sure you're completing more passes than that. I mean, that's just, you're not really giving yourself a chance if you're only completing like 45% of your passes.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this on Twitter while I was watching it live, and like we're just unable to string together 4 passes in a row. And at any point in the second half, that was just off the table. And I think at that point, when you need to really work something all the way in, basically the game plan hasn't worked for the first 60. The last half hour, you might as well try some new stuff, switch it up a little bit, and that just kind of wasn't available to them. Let's scoot ahead. Sunday's Gold Cup quarterfinal against Colombia. What do we need to know about this Colombian side?
So we came into this tournament obviously excited about Linda Caicedo because she's really fucking exciting to watch. Mm-hmm. She has scored 2 goals so far this tournament. Nobody's surprised by that. One of those was while Colombia was up 4-0 over Panama. She scored that in the 84th. And then the other goal she scored was essentially to put the last match out of reach. That was versus Puerto Rico in the 53rd minute to put her squad up 2-0, kind of salt away that one as well. That goal against Puerto Rico gave us yet another glimpse into Caicedo's ceiling, where she receives the pass. The first touch is absolutely perfect. She effortlessly weaves between two defenders. They're completely confused. And then she plays the ball onto her right foot and just smashes it home. I cannot believe what a genius she is on the ball and how quick thinking she is. And then the ability to just rifle shots like that. I know we'll talk more about her. Everybody will. I've also been really impressed with Catalina Usme. She scored 3 goals, 2 assists, and she's probably looked like their most threatening player in that 1-0 loss to Brazil. I was really impressed with her in that match. She had the strike to open up the scoring versus Puerto Rico, absolute rocket. And it looks like Usme, I mean, she just has a nose for the goal and a pure striker's touch to go with it. So with those two up top, Colombia's cooking.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up Usme against Puerto Rico. And it's funny because the color commentator on the U.S. match was complaining about this, like the U.S. attack being so narrow, everybody within the middle third of the field for the most part. And she was making the point, you just have to use the edges, give yourself space. But on this Usme goal, like you mentioned, Caicedo's like all the way wide to the left, kind of dancing around the corner flag. And she's so good, so much gravity that she just creates that space for Usme. And that strike, nobody was touching that. I mean, it just perfectly placed. She had so much space. It didn't matter where the keeper went. Like she would have just sent it the other way. So that was a goal. For the moment, like the Caicedo ball comes in, it's probably a goal at that point. Between Usme and Pavi, who I think has also been really tremendous for Colombia, I think they kind of sneakily pose a threat to the U.S., much along the lines of like what we saw versus Mexico.
I think it's fair. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they got a lot of good players. I'm glad you mentioned Pavi. She's looked really good. I would also keep my eyes peeled for 26-year-old Jorlin Carabali. She was given the opportunity to take, it looks like she's got the green light for free kicks around the goal. She's a center half. She plays for Brighton and Hove Albion. She nearly scored on a set piece from right outside the box versus Puerto Rico. But the keeper made a great save to just barely keep it out. You know, if we're looking ahead, if you're thinking about the Olympics and other international tournaments, frankly, adding Mayra Ramirez to this squad would be especially concerning for the U.S. women's national team. But even without the newly minted Chelsea number 9, I think the Stars and Stripes are going to have to come to play.
I totally agree with that. We obviously saw what Colombia was capable of in the World Cup. You know, they reached the quarterfinals before falling to your Lionesses in a pretty hotly contested affair. That one was, you broke a sweat or two in that one, if I remember correctly. Without Ramirez beating this U.S. team, it's going to be a tall task for the Colombians. But with the way the U.S. has looked, it could happen. I think, like I said, we're just going to have to monitor it. Zooming out, though, with the potential road to the final, having to go through Colombia, then Canada, because they're the 1 seed, and then potentially Brazil, or maybe worse, Mexico waiting for us in the final. If I gave you U.S. versus the field, who are you taking? I'm very curious about this.
If I have to choose, which I do, because this would be a pretty boring podcast if I just refuse to answer a hypothetical question like this, I think I'm going to take the USA.
Okay.
I think the roster can put together the best full 11 of the teams remaining in the tournament. I think it's a matter of Twyla Kilgore and the staff kind of pulling the right levers to get those 11 on the field. Where do you land on this?
All right, well, I'm sort of jumping the gun here. We'll talk about what we saw in the final of the UEFA Nations League, where we saw the World Cup champions from Spain take on France and exactly what they look like. All I'll say is watching Spain versus France, utterly terrifying. The thing I keep going back to is, who on this U.S. team are you really afraid of if you're a Canada or a Brazil or a Colombia? Like Rodman hasn't looked great. Smith's looked a little bit of a mess. Morgan, I'm not really afraid of her. Haran's looked off. Lynn Williams, not a crazy impact so far. So there just is not really, I mean, it's probably Moultrie and Shaw, like if we're being honest, just because there's not so much tape on them, and the tape that you do have, it's like they look fucking dynamic. So I feel like these top teams could kind of game plan for us. And it's reminding me of, over the summer, if there are any holdovers from our previous podcast, I did predict Sweden beating the U.S. at the World Cup. And I think if I'm forced to pick here, I have to take the field. I don't think the U.S. is the most skilled team in the tournament. at this point, which is wild to say, I don't think they're the smartest team in this tournament. Like, we made that Mexico match really, really hard on ourselves. And I just don't really see the cohesion as a squad. And all of a sudden, our bread and butter, our athleticism, no longer looks like a huge advantage here. Like, I think, people are out there running with us. In some instances, they're like half a step ahead, whether that's an IQ thing or it's physical and it's just quickness and agility related. Either way, like, we're not just blowing past teams like we have in the past. And this isn't the World Cup. This is the CONCACAF Gold Cup, so it's really giving me a good amount of pause. The last thing I'll mention here, I don't think we're going to have the best player on the field when we play Colombia. We can assemble the best 11, but that's a supernova that they have there. Could the U.S. turn it around and win 3 straight? Yeah, I think they can. Will they turn it around and win 3 straight? No, I don't think they will. So that's kind of where I stand with this.
I love it. I mean, I think those are all super fair points. I think the athleticism, to your point, it's certainly close. Anytime the USA could put the combo of, and I think you make fair points about some of these players not playing their absolute best right now. But when the USA can run Rodman, Williams, Lavelle, Haran, Sonnet, who I think is sneaky in this category, Gurma, Dunn, and Niswanger. If you can have all of them on the pitch at the same time, you have quickness and physicality that's going to be real tough for opponents to cope with. But I think you're right. We're not blowing the doors off anybody.
Real quick note on the physicality. I saw a lot more of the U.S. players looking at the ref, trying to get a little something, and kind of getting knocked around a little bit by a smaller, but maybe more intense Mexico side. I mean,
That's fair.
It's just weird to see.
Yeah.
Ovalle was super physical. I think she picked up a yellow card. So the physicality to the eye test is there, but on the field, I'm not sure that we definitely didn't see it in that Mexico match. I don't think I was super locked in enough to kind of see like what it looked like against the DR or Argentina. Maybe I don't think Argentina plays that quite a brand of football, although they were pretty tough physically too. But I think as we progress, Colombia, Brazil, Canada, they've got some sick athletes on that squad as well. So this is going to be tricky. But if the US can, even if they can make a deep run, kind of pull it together and like brush off this most recent result, I think that's huge for them going to the Olympics. But if we get a quarterfinals performance like we got last stage of the group stage match, I think that's sort of like a little bit of scary, maybe it's scary minutes, not quite scary hours, but scary minutes, I'll say.
I think you're spot on with that for sure. If they look flat against Colombia, now we're talking, like, I feel like looking great and beating Colombia is really good and it helps. Looking flat and getting outplayed against Colombia is like degrees on the negative side, if that makes any sense. Like, it's worse to lose that match than it is
setback.
Better to win. Yeah, I think it would be absolutely considered a setback. And I want to point out, like, in terms of you talking about football IQ and pure skill, I think you raised some really good points on that. I think that is what is going to be the most like lineup dependent part of the squad. I still think, and I think we're probably aligned on this if I'm understanding you correctly, probably some of the USA's best lineups they could put on the pitch still might not be quite as decisive as Canada or have the total package of football IQ and skill as the Brazilian team. So yeah, I think that's a little concerning, but this was always going to happen. Like we talked about it during the World Cup. We've talked about it at length here. I think it is the overarching conversation in women's football right now, especially in the country we live in. And I think a lot of women's national team fans were looking for a real challenge and the opportunity to see the USA win tough games. You got it. That's why
here we are.
If the Gold Cup is, we're here now. So if the Gold Cup is going to look like this, if the Gold Cup looks as competitive as like the Euros, unless you're going to just fall completely by the wayside, in the long run, it's going to be better for the program, better for the players.
That's a great comparison point to line it up against the Euros. I think probably the Euros has a little bit of an advantage at this point, but not to say that it can't swing back the other way. You were batting your eyes at El Salvador earlier this week. We saw what this Mexico team can do. Obviously, a bunch of World Cup sides on this side of the pond as well. This is just great for the game, all in all. And it doesn't mean, if the U.S. does slip a little bit these next coming years, doesn't mean it's over. Duke comes back, the Yankees come back, the Lakers come back. things tend to be a little cyclical. We would just need to kind of reset a little bit, find a little bit of our new secret sauce. And I think when we talk about some of the young talent, Shaw and Moultrie more specifically, even Niswanger is a little younger, compared to some of the other vets on the side. We did a lot of NWSL draft coverage, a lot of young talent entering the league there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen quickly. We talked about the Spain side, who we'll get into in a little bit here. 10 years ago, they weren't even in the World Cup. And this is going to be their first Olympics this summer. So life comes at you fast.
It sure does, especially in CONCACAF. So I think it's worth mentioning. We mentioned a couple of the players on Mexico's team that, were either in the U.S. Youth National Team program. It might not hurt to look and see when you have these kind of dual national players. If Mexico is really, really high on a player, maybe we should take a second, third, fourth look at that player and be like, wait, why do they want him so much? Because they're clearly building something over there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that. There's just going to be a lot of push and pull for talent, no doubt. Either way, Sunday night, 8:15 p.m. Eastern, USA Colombia closes out the quarterfinals. So by that point, we're also going to know who we might be up against if we're able to survive that match. All right, man. I think we did it. This has been another episode of Into the Channel. Remember, subscribe or follow Into the Channel, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to watch or listen at ITC_pod on X, at Into the Channel pod on Threads. Big thanks to you for watching and listening, no matter your club, no matter your country. The Into the Channel community is a place where we can all hang out, share ideas, fire off these takes, hit the crossbar with a couple, and celebrate the sport we love. We are thrilled to have each and every one of you hanging out with us. Comments, ratings, reviews, those never hurt. Big thank you to my co-host as well, Mr. Grant Engel, for never spazzing out like Alyssa Nair.
I appreciate that, buddy, and I will try, and I thank you for sticking with me, even for those times I try a backwards overhead kick with an attacker rushing onto me.
Got to get the ball upfield. Got it.
We'll get it there.